Eggs feel like one of the most ordinary foods in the American kitchen, always there, always affordable, always part of daily life. But that sense of permanence is an illusion. The modern egg supply is not natural abundance. It's the result of centuries of domestication and, more importantly, industrial scaling. Today, over 1 trillion chicken eggs are consumed globally each year, making them one of the most widely produced foods on Earth. Yet this dominance only exists because chickens, originally domesticated from the red jungle fowl in Southeast Asia around 8,000 years ago, were gradually adapted to human needs. Early societies valued chickens more for meat or ritual use, and egg consumption remained inconsistent and limited for thousands of years. The real turning point came much later, in 1895, with the development of large-scale artificial incubation. Before that, egg production depended entirely on natural laying cycles, which meant supply was seasonal, unpredictable, and relatively scarce. Industrial incubation changed everything. It removed biological constraints, allowing farmers to control reproduction, scale output, and stabilize supply year-round. What had once been an occasional food became a daily staple almost overnight in historical terms. This shift fundamentally redefined how people interact with eggs. In the US today, eggs are priced, packaged, and distributed with the efficiency of any mass-produced commodity. But behind that convenience lies a system engineered for consistency, not nature. The key insight is simple, but often overlooked. Eggs are not inherently abundant. Their availability is manufactured. What feels like a basic, timeless ingredient is actually the product of industrial innovation, an everyday food built on technology, logistics, and control, rather than natural supply. At a glance, an egg looks simple, a smooth shell hiding a uniform interior. But inside, it's a highly structured biological system where every component serves a precise function, and that structure directly determines its quality. The yolk is the nutritional core, packed with fats, fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, and E, and a significant portion of the egg's protein. It's designed to sustain life, which is why it carries such a dense concentration of energy and nutrients. Surrounding it, the egg white, or albumin, is almost entirely made of water and protein. Its role isn't flavor or richness, but protection. It forms a defensive barrier that cushions the yolk and slows bacterial growth, acting as a natural food safety system long before refrigeration existed. Even subtle visual details reveal deeper truths. The color of the yolk, for example, isn't random, it reflects the chicken's diet. A pale yellow yolk typically comes from a grain-fed chicken in a controlled environment, while a deep orange yolk suggests a more varied diet, often including insects or plants rich in carotenoids. In other words, what the animal eats. In the United States, where large-scale egg production prioritizes consistency and efficiency, most eggs are engineered to look uniform. But uniformity doesn't always mean higher quality. It often means controlled inputs and standardized feed. The key insight is that an egg's value isn't just defined by its protein content or calorie count. It's defined by the ecosystem that produced it. From feed quality to living conditions, every upstream decision leaves a trace inside the shell, making eggs one of the clearest examples of how agricultural systems directly shape the food we consume. An egg may look like one of the simplest foods in the American diet, but beneath its shell is a highly optimized biological system where structure directly defines quality. The yolk is the centerpiece rich in fats, essential vitamins, and proteins. It functions as a concentrated energy source designed to sustain life. That's why it carries most of the flavor and nutritional density people associate with a good egg. Surrounding it, the egg white plays a completely different role. Made mostly of water and protein, it acts as a protective buffer, insulating the yolk and slowing the growth of bacteria. Long before modern food safety systems, this natural design allowed eggs to remain stable and usable in a wide range of environments. What makes eggs especially interesting is how visibly they reflect the conditions in which they were produced. One of the clearest indicators is yolk color. In the US, a pale yellow yolk usually comes from hens fed a controlled grain-based diet in industrial settings. In contrast, a deeper orange yolk often signals a more diverse diet, one that includes plants, insects, or nutrient-rich feed containing natural pigments like carotenoids. That difference isn't just cosmetic. It often correlates with variations in flavor, micronutrient content, and overall eating experience. This turns eggs into more than a basic grocery item. They become a direct output of the agricultural system behind them. Large-scale production prioritizes uniformity, efficiency, and predictable results, which is why most supermarket eggs look nearly identical. But that consistency is engineered, not natural. The key insight is straightforward. Food quality doesn't begin in the kitchen, it starts at the farm. Every decision, from feed composition to living conditions, leaves a measurable imprint inside the shell. In that sense, an egg is not just something you eat, it's a reflection of the entire ecosystem that produced it. Eggs may be universal, but the way people eat them is anything but. Across the world, the same ingredient is transformed into completely different culinary experiences, each shaped by local history, culture, and taste. In Southeast Asia, for example, Fertilized duck eggs become balut, a bold and deeply traditional street food. Boiled and eaten straight from the shell, it's valued not just for flavor, but for its cultural identity, something that connects generations and reflects regional attitudes toward food, resourcefulness, and nutrition. At the other end of the spectrum, quail eggs move fluidly between everyday and luxury. In Japan, they appear in bento boxes and ramen as a familiar, almost casual ingredient. In Europe, the same small eggs are often elevated into fine dining, paired with caviar or foie gras in upscale restaurants. The ingredient doesn't change, only the context does. Goose eggs tell a similar story. In parts of Irish history, they were considered a luxury, served at elite banquets and associated with wealth and status due to their size, richness, and limited seasonal availability. What's striking is not just the diversity, but the contrast. The same category of food can be seen as comfort, delicacy, or even challenge, depending on where you are. There is no single correct way to eat an egg, only culturally defined norms that shape perception. The deeper insight is clear. Food is never just about ingredients. It's about meaning. Eggs, in this case, act as a cultural mirror, reflecting how different societies interpret value, tradition, and even identity. What feels unusual in one country may be completely ordinary in another, proving that taste is not fixed, it's learned, inherited, and constantly evolving. When most people think of eggs, they picture something small, uniform, and predictable. But in reality, eggs vary dramatically in size, shape, and structure because they are designed by nature, not for human convenience, but for survival. At the extreme end, the ostrich egg stands as the largest of all, weighing around 3 pounds, about 1.5 kilograms, and containing the equivalent of roughly 20 chicken eggs. Its shell is not just thick, it's engineered for protection, strong enough to support the weight of an adult human without cracking. This isn't excess. It's a biological response to the vulnerability of nesting on open ground, where durability becomes critical. Emu eggs offer a completely different kind of adaptation. Smaller than ostrich eggs, but still massive compared to chicken eggs, they are instantly recognizable by their deep, almost black-green shells. That color isn't just aesthetic, it provides camouflage in natural environments. At the same time, the shell's layered structure creates a natural contrast when carved, which is why emu eggs have been used in art for thousands of years, especially in indigenous Australian cultures. What these variations reveal is a larger pattern. Eggs are not standardized objects. Their size, strength, and appearance are shaped by environmental pressures, predators, climate, nesting habits, not by culinary use. Chickens produce small, frequent eggs because it maximizes reproductive efficiency. Larger birds produce fewer but more protected eggs because survival rates demand it. The key insight is that nature doesn't optimize for what humans want, it optimizes for what species need to survive. What we see on our plate is just a narrow slice of that diversity, simplified and standardized by agriculture. Outside of that system, eggs are far more varied, each one reflecting the specific conditions of the world it came from. Long before eggs became a breakfast staple, they were already serving roles far beyond food. In some of the earliest human societies, eggs, particularly ostrich eggs, functioned as tools, storage systems, and even early forms of technology. Archaeological evidence shows that as far back as 60,000 years ago, humans in Africa used emptied ostrich eggshells as durable water containers. Their thick shells could be hollowed out, carried across long distances, and reused repeatedly in harsh, dry environments. In a world without ceramics or metal, this was a practical innovation, one that directly supported survival. But the significance of eggs didn't stop at utility. Across civilizations, they also took on symbolic meaning. In many cultures, eggs became powerful representations of life, rebirth, and continuity. Ancient Egyptians placed eggs in tombs as symbols of regeneration. In early Christian traditions, eggs were associated with resurrection and renewal, eventually evolving into rituals like Easter eggs. Similar themes appear in Greek, Persian, and Asian cultures, where eggs represent the origin of life or the universe itself. What makes this especially compelling is how a single natural object can operate on multiple levels at once: practical, symbolic, and cultural. Eggs were not just consumed, they were integrated into belief systems and daily survival strategies. The deeper insight is that food is rarely just about nourishment. In many cases, it becomes part of the technological and cultural foundation of a society. Eggs illustrate this clearly. Something as simple as a shell once functioned as a tool, while its meaning helped shape rituals and identities that still exist today. Fish eggs, known broadly as roe, exist in an entirely different category from bird eggs, both in how they're consumed and how they're valued. At the top of that spectrum sits caviar, specifically the salt-cured eggs of sturgeon, a product long associated with luxury, exclusivity, and status. Historically reserved for royalty and elite dining, high-grade caviar can command prices of tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram. Its value isn't driven by nutrition, it's driven by rarity, long maturation cycles of sturgeon, and the cultural weight built around it over centuries. In contrast, salmon roe, or akura, offers a more accessible entry point into this category. Its large, translucent orange pearls deliver a burst of briny, slightly sweet flavor and are widely used in Japanese cuisine. While still considered premium, ikura is far more available, appearing in sushi, rice bowls, and seafood markets across the United States. Then there's tobiko, the roe of flying fish much smaller, crispier, and often brightly colored. It's commonly used as a garnish on sushi rolls, adding texture and visual contrast rather than acting as the main feature. What ties these together is not just their origin, but how differently they are positioned. The same basic ingredient, fish eggs, can range from everyday topping to ultra-luxury commodity depending on species, supply, and cultural perception. The key insight is that food value is rarely about calories or protein alone. It's constructed. Scarcity, tradition, and symbolism often matter more than nutrition. Roe makes this especially clear. What you're paying for isn't just taste, it's access, story, and status. Some eggs are not just cooked, they are fundamentally transformed, reshaped by technique into something entirely different from their original form. The century egg is one of the most striking examples. Common in Chinese cuisine, it is preserved for weeks or even months in a mixture of clay, ash, salt, and alkaline substances. During this process, the egg undergoes a chemical shift. The proteins break down and reorganize, turning the clear egg white into a dark, translucent jelly, while the yolk becomes creamy, dense, and intensely flavored. The result is not simply a preserved egg, but a completely redefined food with new textures, aromas, and taste profiles that bear little resemblance to a fresh egg. On the other side of the world, escamoles, often called the caviar of Mexico, offer a different kind of transformation. These are not bird eggs at all, but ant larvae harvested from the roots of agave plants. The process is labor-intensive and risky, requiring careful extraction from aggressive ant colonies. Once prepared, Eskimos have a soft, buttery texture and a subtle nutty flavor, often sautéed with butter and spices. Despite their unusual origin, they are considered a delicacy, deeply tied to indigenous culinary traditions dating back to the Aztec civilization. What connects these examples is not the ingredient itself, but the role of technique in redefining it. Through chemistry, preservation, or cultural practice, something familiar can become entirely new. The key insight is clear. Food is not fixed. With the right methods, its structure, flavor, and identity can all be transformed. What we recognize as an egg is not just determined by biology, but by how humans choose to process and reinterpret it. What ends up on our plate is rarely determined by taste alone. It's shaped by economics. The dominance of chicken eggs in the United States isn't because they are inherently superior, but because chickens are incredibly efficient producers. A single hen can lay close to 300 eggs per year, making large-scale production predictable, scalable, and profitable. In contrast, turkey eggs are rarely seen in grocery stores, not because they lack flavor. In fact, they are often described as richer and creamier, but because turkeys lay far fewer eggs and take longer to mature. From a business standpoint, raising turkeys for eggs simply doesn't make sense when their primary value comes from meat production. This pattern extends across the entire food system. Many types of eggs that could be eaten are never widely consumed because they don't fit into an efficient production model. Some birds produce eggs seasonally, others lay too infrequently, and in many cases, those eggs are more valuable for hatching the next generation than for consumption. Even when a product has culinary potential, it can disappear from the market if it doesn't align with cost, scale, and demand. The result is a food landscape that feels natural, but is actually highly selective. Consumers are not choosing from all possible options, they're choosing from what the system makes available. The key insight is straightforward. Markets don't prioritize the most flavorful or interesting foods. They prioritize efficiency. What becomes common is not always what's best. It's what can be produced consistently, at scale, and at the lowest cost. Not all eggs can be treated as just another ingredient. Some exist at the intersection of food, survival, and ethical responsibility. Sea turtle eggs are one of the clearest examples. For centuries, they were consumed by coastal communities across Latin America, Southeast Asia, and island regions, valued as a rich and accessible source of nutrition. But as global demand increased and habitats declined, turtle populations dropped sharply. Today, all sea turtle species are classified as threatened or endangered, and the commercial harvesting of their eggs is illegal in most countries. Yet the reality is more complex than simple prohibition. In many regions, illegal harvesting still persists, not because of ignorance, but because of economic necessity. For some communities, collecting and selling turtle eggs can represent a significant source of income in areas where alternatives are limited. This creates a difficult tension between conservation efforts and local livelihoods. In response, some countries have experimented with regulated harvesting programs, allowing controlled collection while protecting the majority of nests, attempting to balance ecological preservation with human needs. What this reveals is that food choices are rarely neutral. Behind certain ingredients are systems of impact on ecosystems, species, survival, and human communities. The key insight is that eating is not just a matter of taste or tradition, it is also a decision with ethical consequences. What we choose to consume can either support sustainability or contribute to long-term damage, making awareness just as important as preference in the modern food landscape. Not all eggs come from birds, and some of the most prized varieties come from sources that most people would never expect. Escamoles, often referred to as the caviar of Mexico, are a perfect example. These are the larvae of large black ants, harvested from the roots of agave plants in central Mexico. The process is anything but simple. Harvesters must carefully dig into underground nests while avoiding aggressive ants that can bite repeatedly, all while preserving the colony for future cycles. It's labor-intensive, physically demanding, and requires deep local knowledge passed down through generations. Despite or because of this difficulty, escamoles are considered a delicacy. When cooked, they have a soft, buttery texture and a subtle, nutty flavor, often sautéed with butter, garlic, and herbs. They've been part of Mexican cuisine since the time of the Aztecs, where they were valued enough to be included in tribute systems. Today, they appear in high-end restaurants and can command prices comparable to premium seafood. What makes escamoles especially interesting is not just their taste, but what they represent. Their value isn't driven by mass appeal or nutritional superiority, it's driven by scarcity, effort, and history. The key insight is that delicacies are rarely defined by what they are, but by how hard they are to obtain and the story behind them. The more difficult, rare, and culturally rooted a food is, the more it tends to be elevated. In that sense, something as unexpected as ant eggs can become one of the most respected ingredients on the table. When you step back and look at something as ordinary as an egg, a much larger pattern begins to emerge, one that goes far beyond food. The first message is clear. What we consider normal or basic is often the result of systems we rarely see. Eggs feel abundant, cheap, and always available, but that reality is built on industrial processes, economic decisions, and centuries of human intervention. This leads to a more personal perspective. In everyday life, we often mistake convenience for truth. Just because something is easy to access does not mean it is naturally abundant or inherently simple. Recognizing this helps shift how we think not just about food, but about any system we rely on, from work to technology. A second message lies in how quality is created. An egg's nutritional value, flavor, and even appearance are shaped long before it reaches the plate, influenced by feed, environment, and care. This reflects a broader principle. Outcomes are determined upstream. In personal terms, this means that results, whether in health, career, or relationships, are rarely the product of a single moment. They are the accumulation of conditions, habits, and environments over time. If you want better results, you don't just change the output, you redesign the system that produces it. This is a practical takeaway. Focus less on short-term fixes and more on building better inputs, whether that's your daily routine, your learning environment, or the people you surround yourself with. Another important perspective comes from cultural diversity. The way different societies treat eggs from balut to caviar shows that value is not fixed. What is considered normal, luxurious, or even strange depends entirely on context. Applied to life, this suggests that many of our assumptions are local, not universal. Being aware of this can make you more adaptable and open-minded. Instead of rejecting unfamiliar ideas or approaches, you start to see them as alternative solutions, shaped by different conditions. In practice, this means seeking out diverse perspectives, whether in business, creativity, or problem-solving, because innovation often comes from combining ideas across contexts. There is also a strong economic lesson. The dominance of chicken eggs is not about taste, it's about efficiency. Markets prioritize what can be produced consistently and at scale, not necessarily what is best. This applies directly to modern life. Many systems, education, corporate structures, even social media optimize for efficiency and scalability, not always for depth or quality. The practical response is to be intentional about your choices. Just because something is popular or widely available does not mean it is the best option for you. Whether it's the food you eat, the information you consume, or the career path you follow, it's worth asking, is this optimized for me, or just optimized for the system? Ethics is another layer that cannot be ignored. The issue of turtle eggs highlights how consumption can have real consequences on ecosystems and communities. This introduces a more grounded, actionable mindset. Awareness should guide behavior. You don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be informed. In daily life, this translates into small but meaningful decisions, choosing sustainable products when possible, reducing waste, or supporting systems that align with long-term well-being rather than short-term convenience. These choices may seem minor individually, but collectively, they shape demand and influence how systems evolve. Finally, there is a deeper insight about value itself. Foods like escamoles or caviar show that what we consider valuable is often tied to rarity, effort, and story rather than pure utility. This has a direct parallel in life. Skills, experiences, and opportunities that are difficult to obtain tend to carry more weight. Instead of chasing what is easy or immediately rewarding, there is long-term value in pursuing things that require effort, patience, and depth, whether that's mastering a skill, building meaningful relationships, or creating something original. The practical solution that ties all of this together is to shift from passive consumption to active awareness. Pay attention to systems, not just outcomes. Improve inputs, not just results. Stay open to different perspectives. Question what is popular. Make choices that align with your values, and invest in things that are difficult but meaningful. In doing so, you move from simply reacting to the world to intentionally shaping your place within it, just as something as simple as an egg reveals that even the most ordinary things are the result of complex, deliberate processes.